Trains are great, especially if you need to move large quantities of freight across the country rather quickly. Traffic and weight don't affect them much, since they don't have to stop for traffic and way stations. The only thing that slows the train down is usually another train or difficult terrain like mountains. So they're great for people like the military who need to move large volumes of men and material throughout the country, which is great for them until something goes wrong. So, what happened? I'm Andrew, and this is History's a Disaster. Tonight, we're diving into the Roseville Yard disaster. And tonight's episode is brought to you by Jerry Berry's Cherry Shake Shack. Good old Jerry Berry is back with a brand new shake for a limited time. The Cherry Bomb. Jerry's classic cherry shake infused with Pop Rocks. Every sip will leave an explosion of flavor in your mouth. In 1973, despite the winding down of the Vietnam War, the military was still going through a ton of explosives. Bombing raids were still in full swing in Southeast Asia. The Hawthorne Naval Ammunition Depot in Hawthorne, Nevada, served as one of the main storage and distribution points for these bombs. From Hawthorne, munitions traveled by rail westward across the Sierra Nevada mountains to ports in the San Francisco Bay Area where they would be loaded onto ships bound for Vietnam. The Roseville Rail Yard was an important stop in the supply chain. Situated in the Sacramento Valley at the western base of the Sierra Nevada, it functioned as a major switching point where trains descending from the mountains could be reorganized, inspected, and sent onward to their destinations. The yard was spread across several miles with extensive networks of tracks for arrival, departure, and storage. The yard relied on manual switching and mechanical classification methods, labor-intensive processes that, while generally reliable, were vulnerable to human error and mechanical failure. Especially in the 70s, when a lot of rail lines were a bit in decline and maintenance wasn't always what it should have been due to budget cuts. The Southern Pacific train, when it left Hawthorne on its way to the Concord Naval Weapons Station, was made up of multiple boxcars, all owned by the Department of Defense and marked with the designation DODX. These were not modern, specially designed munition cars like you'd find now, but instead, the normal, shitty wooden boxcars of the time that had been loaded with Mark 81 general-purpose aerial bombs, each weighing 250 pounds each, filled with tritonol explosive, which is a mix of TNT and aluminum powder. The bombs were considered stable under normal conditions, but they were being transported in these shitty-ass wooden cars. Given every other thing I've seen and read about rail cars and the railroad itself for the time, see the episode on the Waverly train explosion, conditions far from normal. As the munitions train made its way westward from Nevada, it had to deal with some shitty, rough terrain on the way. The route required a long descent from the high desert down through the Sierra Nevada mountains, which meant constant braking to control the train's speed on the downgrade. An engineering student camping near Emigrant Gap, more than 60 miles east of Roseville, was able to see sparks flying from the wheels of the train as it braked, and noticed a wheel rim on one of the bomb-carrying cars glowing red. This witness, whose name is unknown, just happened to be a weirdo recording train sounds as a hobby. But it would later provide testimony that became crucial to understanding exactly what happened. He saw something that should have triggered an alarm. Evidence of severe overheating in the wheel assembly of at least one car carrying thousands of pounds of high explosives. The train had passed through two hotbox detectors, which are devices designed to identify overheating near wheels. These detectors were functioning properly, but only scanned a portion of the wheel. The glowing wheel rim was in a section not covered by the detector sensors, so it went undetected. The train continued onward toward Roseville, the metal wheel continuing to heat up just below the wooden floor of the boxcar above. The Southern Pacific train arrived at the Roseville Yard at 6:05 on April 28th. The train had been switched to a Southern Pacific line in Sparks, Nevada, before descending from Donner Summit. It was positioned in the yard as a stopping point before continuing to its final destination. For the next hour and a half, the deadly cargo sat quietly on the tracks while rail workers went about their morning routines. At 7:40, a crewman in the yard noticed smoke rising from one of the boxcars. The overheated wheel assembly had finally ignited the wooden floor of the car, and a fire was now burning inside a container filled with hundreds of high-explosive bombs. The crewman reported the fire, and word quickly spread to the nearby fire station. In the small town of Antelope, right next to the rail yard, Citrus Heights Fire Battalion Chief Lloyd Patterson was conducting a final inspection of Citrus Heights Station 6 that had just been completed the day before. His Lieutenant F. Grundy was there with him and his wife, who was 9 months pregnant and getting ready to move into the tiny station, which would be their new home. Chief Patterson and Lieutenant Grundy, still inspecting the new fire station just hundreds of yards away, saw the smoke. A small explosion would also catch their attention. Patterson immediately called for additional equipment and walked toward the rail yard to assess the situation. On his way, he encountered 2 Southern Pacific employees who had also seen the smoke and explosion. As the 3 men stood exchanging information, trying to determine the best course of action, shit got worse. At 8:03, while Patterson and the employees were discussing the problem, the first major explosion occurred. The force of the blast was staggering. It was enough that the men were knocked to the ground. Chief Patterson had just enough time to get back to the fire station and evacuate Lieutenant Grundy and his pregnant wife before the full chain reaction began. The first boxcar's explosion triggered another, which sent off another one, creating a domino effect of detonations that would continue for more than 32 hours. Each explosion sent massive fireballs hundreds of feet into the air, shooting out shrapnel in all directions and creating shockwaves that could be felt for miles. Vibrations from the explosions were felt up to 15 miles away, while explosions were heard up to 40 miles. From Yuba City to the north to areas far south of Sacramento, windows shattered in homes 3 to 4 miles from the blast site. The ground shook as if from an earthquake. Those experiencing it for the first time had no frame of reference for what was happening. Jeffrey Flores, then a young boy living with his 12 brothers and sisters, later recalled the terror of those moments. "We thought we were in a war," he said, noting that the Vietnam War was ongoing at the time and all power was knocked out. His description captured the surreal horror, watching rolls of fire form mushroom clouds, hearing the terrible booms, feeling their eardrums strained from the concussive force, and then the deadly rain of metal shrapnel falling from the sky. Another survivor remembered watching television when suddenly their sliding glass door burst inward, then immediately reversed direction and flew back out, carrying them with it. The overpressure waves from the explosions made the very air pulse with deadly force. 9 emergency service agencies, local, state, and federal, converged on the site. Firefighters, police officers, National Guard troops, California Highway Patrol, and U.S. Army explosive ordnance disposal personnel rushed toward the smoke and flames, even as additional explosions continued to rock the area. Paul Lucky, then just 24 years old and only 3 months into his new job with the Citrus Heights Fire Department, was stationed 3 miles from the explosion. The blast was so loud and strong that it knocked him down. Still in his turnout gear, Lucky clung to the back of Engine 9 as it sped toward the scene. He was in for a bit of a shock when he saw a large piece of a boxcar embedded in a railroad signal pole 15 feet above the ground. The landscape had been transformed into a war zone full of craters, twisted metal, and raging fires. The immediate priority was evacuation as first responders realized the scale of the emergency. 18 boxcars were loaded with thousands of bombs, many of which had not yet detonated. They made the decision to clear the surrounding areas. 30,000 people were evacuated from the nearby towns of Antelope, Roseville, and Citrus Heights. The Placer County Fairgrounds and Mariloma would serve as evacuation shelters where residents gathered. Many who had fled their homes in nothing but pajamas and ropes, carrying nothing but themselves and their kids. The California National Guard set up a perimeter within a 2-mile radius of the explosions, extending all the way out to Sylvan Corners. 25 checkpoints were set up on the edges of the danger zone, manned by county deputies and National Guardsmen. Only those with emergency business were allowed into the cordoned-off sectors. Throughout Saturday, the explosions continued. Firefighters could do little but maintain a perimeter and wait, knowing that approaching the burning boxcars would be suicide. Each new detonation sent more shrapnel flying through the air, more shockwaves rippling outward, more smoke billowing into the spring sky. Those who remained in the area watched in horrified fascination as the spectacle continued. Larry Fritz, who had just turned 18 and would later become the president of the Citrus Heights Historical Society, spent Saturday evening at the Sunrise Drive-In Theater near Greenback Lane and Fair Oaks Boulevard. Watching the movie, moviegoers could see orange flashes to the right of the screen every few minutes as bombs continued to explode. Fritz recalled that eventually they stopped watching the movie and instead watched the deadly fireworks display continuing miles away. As the fires finally burnt out and the last bombs detonated, 32 hours after the first explosion, the true scale became apparent. The Roseville Rail Yard, once the beating heart of West Coast freight operations, had been transformed into a moonscape of craters and devastation. 169 freight cars from the yard were destroyed. 98 other freight cars and 1 locomotive were damaged. The explosions had carved enormous craters in the ground, some large enough to swallow entire vehicles. Railroad tracks had been twisted into grotesque sculptures of bent metal. Buildings had been reduced to rubble or burned to their foundations. The tiny town of Antelope bore the brunt of the physical destruction. Of the 32 structures in Antelope, 9 were completely destroyed, 11 were heavily damaged, and 12 were slightly damaged. Among the buildings completely destroyed was the Citrus Heights Fire Station 6, the station that Chief Patterson had been inspecting just hours before the disaster, now reduced to foundation walls and debris. The zone of damage extended far beyond Antelope. Roughly 5,500 buildings were damaged, with most of them being houses. Heavy damage extended out nearly 1.5 miles. Heavy damage reached out to a radius of about 6,800 feet, nearly 1 1/3 miles from the explosion site. Slight damage, mostly broken windows and cracked walls, occurred up to 3 miles away. Across the region, homes had broken windows, damaged roofs, and shrapnel scars. One house caught fire from falling debris, but firefighters managed to save nearby houses despite the ongoing danger. Miraculously, no one was killed, but 348 people were injured. The absence of death was attributed to several factors, like the fact that it was Saturday morning and many people were still safely inside their homes at the time. The rail yard's location on the outskirts of developed areas also created a buffer zone, and the prompt evacuation removed thousands of people from harm's way before the worst explosions occurred. Most of the injuries happened from flying glass as windows exploded from the overpressure waves. The injured suffered lacerations, bruises, and abrasions. Many would experience hearing damage from the concussive blast. Fewer than 100 of the injured would require hospitalization, with no long-term severe casualties. Even as the last fires burned themselves out, the enormous task of cleanup and recovery began. U.S. Army explosive ordnance disposal personnel combed through the devastated area searching for unexploded bombs. Many of them had been thrown nearly half a mile from the initial explosion site. 2 of them were found embedded in a street a mile and a half away. Hundreds of bombs had been thrown clear without detonating, creating a landscape littered with live explosives. Hundreds of these bombs had been thrown clear without going off, littering the countryside with live explosives. The EOD teams recovered as many as they could, But as Larry Fritz noted, with so many bombs scattered across such a wide area, they inevitably missed some. In October 1997, 8 more unexploded bombs were discovered by Union Pacific crews raiding land at the rail yard for new track construction. A task force composed of people from Union Pacific Railroad, the California EPA, the Department of Toxic Substance Control, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and Sacramento County oversaw the subsequent cleanup. Another unexploded bomb was found in the Union Pacific Rail Yard in Roseville in December of 2024. More than 50 years after the original explosion, they're still finding bombs. Southern Pacific would pay out $23 million in damages, which is equivalent to over $100 million today. The estimated cost to the U.S. government was an additional $5 million. Beyond the direct cost, lawsuits that followed lasted for several years and cost the government millions more. The Roseville Rail Yard was back in operation 3 days after the initial incident, resuming regular freight traffic. The need to get the money flowing again was a strong motivator. Within a week, trains were once again rolling through the reconstructed sections of track, carrying cargo to destinations across the West. The Federal Railroad Administration launched a comprehensive investigation into the disaster, producing Railroad Accident Investigation Report number 4187. The investigation examined every aspect, from the design and loading of the munitions to the condition of the rail cars to the operating procedures of the railroad. The most probable cause investigators concluded was a hotbox, which is overheated wheels on one of the boxcars. The report cited the engineering student who had observed sparks flying from wheels and a wheel rim glowing red as the train descended the mountains. The heavy sustained braking required to control the train's speed on the downgrade had created extreme heat in at least one wheel assembly. This heat then transferred to the wooden floor of the boxcar above, setting off a fire that eventually caused the bombs to detonate. The hotbox detectors the train had passed were functioning properly, but their design limited their effectiveness. They scanned only portions of the wheel area, missing the overheated components that were causing the problem. This represented a critical gap in safety systems, a technological limitation that had fatal potential. However, the report could not completely rule out alternative explanations. The report speculated that improperly manufactured bombs could have detonated, something the Navy denied in several statements. The Navy maintained that its munitions were properly manufactured and stable, arguing that only an external heat source could have triggered the detonation. The Department of Transportation's report noted that the condition of the DoD cars, similar to those involved in the explosion, and the bracing techniques used were inadequate. Current loading and bracing practices permitted excessive movement of bombs within railroad cars, allowing them to smack into each other and impact car walls with force, exposing the public to unnecessary danger. The friction generated by this movement could even start fires independently of wheel problems. In the wake of the blast, the Department of Transportation placed an embargo on the shipment of Navy munitions in the United States. This had not been the first explosion. There had been another similar explosion in 1969 on a different train. So, the Department of Transportation was less than pleased with the Navy. But the embargo wouldn't last long, lasting just 2 days. But the issues that were brought up could not be ignored. Following this incident, another train explosion occurred near Benson, Arizona, where 12 boxcars loaded with 500-pound bombs exploded, destroying 460 feet of railroad bed. This third major incident in 4 years made it undeniable that the system for transporting military explosives was seriously fucked up. This series of explosions ultimately led to reforms. The military revised its standards for loading and bracing munitions in rail cars, improved the designs of the cars themselves, and enhanced inspection procedures. Hotbox detector technology was improved to provide more complete coverage of wheel assemblies. Training for railroad personnel handling military explosives was increased, The era of casually shipping thousands of bombs in shitty wooden boxcars with very little safety precautions had finally come to an end. The broader issue of transporting hazardous materials by rail also received renewed attention. The Roseville disaster contributed to the development of more stringent regulations governing the movement of dangerous cargo through populated areas. Though there would still be debates over the balance between commerce and safety that would continue on to today. This disaster has mostly faded into obscurity. It has been called the disaster lost in history, overshadowed by more recent events and largely forgotten outside the immediate region. The Roseville Carnegie Museum maintains a permanent exhibit featuring artifacts from the disaster, including a split-open bomb fragment that serves as a reminder of what happened. The Citrus Heights Historical Society has organized anniversary events, bringing together survivors to share their experiences with new audiences. The Roseville Rail Yard continues to operate and expand today. Now known as the J.R. Davis Yard, renamed in 1999 for a former Union Pacific president, remains the largest rail facility on the West Coast. Thousands of freight cars pass through it weekly, carrying freight across the western United States and beyond. The yard's importance has only grown in the decades since the explosion. And that was the 1973 Roseville Yard explosion. Thanks for listening. If you liked the show, please consider leaving a rating or review on your app of choice. And you can reach out to the show at historiesofdisaster@gmail.com with questions, comments, or suggestions, as well as following the show on social media like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, whatever. And share the episode. Your friends will love it. And as always, go pet a penguin, take a train ride, chase that dream, live for today, because tomorrow is never guaranteed. Thanks and goodbye.